Meditation for self-confidence. When you can't feel proud of yourself, there's a particular pause that happens when the words, "I'm proud of myself," come close, and then don't land. You might notice it as a blank space, or a tightness, or a feeling like the sentence doesn't belong to you. Not because it isn't true, but because it feels unfamiliar in your mouth. You've done things. You've carried days that were heavier than anyone knew. You've kept going through moments where stopping would have made sense. And still, when pride is mentioned, something inside stays quiet. Sometimes it feels like looking at your own life from the outside, waiting for a signal, a nod, a confirmation that this counts. Without that, it can feel strangely hollow, as if effort alone isn't solid enough to stand on. There's often no dramatic sadness here, more like a low, steady dullness, a sense of almost deserving, almost enough, almost there. You may even recognize moments where others would say, "Of course you should be proud," and yet their words slide past without sticking. Not because you disagree, but because something in you doesn't know how to receive them. It can feel safer to downplay, to keep the bar moving forward, to tell yourself, "Not yet, not after this." Pride gets postponed. What's left in its place is effort without acknowledgement, movement without arrival, a quiet fatigue that doesn't have a clear name. And under that fatigue, there's often a soft confusion. Why does this feel so hard when I'm doing my best? You might notice how quickly your mind scans for proof. Results, progress that can be pointed to, something measurable enough to justify kindness toward yourself. When nothing obvious shows up, the inner space can feel empty. Not painful exactly, just thin, unanchored. In those moments, it's common to turn that emptiness inward, to assume it means something about you, that if pride doesn't come naturally, maybe you haven't earned it. But even that thought doesn't usually arrive loudly. It's quieter than that, more like a habit than a belief, a tendency to pass over yourself, the way you might pass over a familiar street, without noticing the details anymore. There's also often a gentleness hiding here, a care about doing things well, about growing, about becoming someone reliable to others and maybe to yourself. Yet that same care can make it harder to pause long enough, to acknowledge what's already been carried. So the sentence, "I'm proud of myself," stays suspended, not rejected, just untouched. And that suspension can feel lonely, because pride at its core isn't about achievement. It's about recognition, being seen even by yourself. When that recognition hasn't been practiced, the absence of it can feel like standing in a quiet room. After the noise has faded, nothing is actively wrong, but something essential is missing. If any of this feels familiar, there's no need to correct it or push it away. This isn't a flaw revealing itself. It's an experience asking to be named. A moment where confidence doesn't feel loud or solid, just distant. A moment where effort is real, but acknowledgement hasn't caught up yet. And here you are, noticing that gap, sitting with it, not rushing past. That noticing itself matters, even if it doesn't feel like enough yet. Just being here with this experience, without proving, without fixing, is already a kind of honesty. We can stay with that for now. When pride feels distant like this, it's rarely because something is missing in you. More often, it has to do with how recognition learned to arrive. For many people, worth didn't start as an inner sensation. It arrived from the outside first. A look of approval, a good result, someone saying that's good, that counts. Over time, the nervous system quietly learned a pattern. I feel okay about myself when there is a response. Not because anyone meant harm. Often it happened in subtle, ordinary ways. Praise when you performed well. Silence when you were simply enduring. Attention when something visible was achieved. So the body learned to listen outward. This isn't a thought you chose. It's a rhythm that formed. The brain is very practical that way. It notices what brings safety, connection, and relief. And it repeats that route. When acknowledgement came from outside, your system learned to wait for it. That waiting can become so automatic that you don't even notice you're doing it. You move forward. You adapt. You handle things. But inside, something pauses, as if asking quietly, is this enough yet? When no answer comes, the pause stays open. This is why confidence can feel strangely empty in quiet moments. Not because confidence is gone, but because it was never asked to stand alone. Without feedback, the nervous system doesn't relax. It stays alert, scanning. Did I do it right? Did it matter? Was it seen? And when there's no clear signal, the body doesn't fill in the silence with pride. It fills it with uncertainty. Again, this isn't weakness. It's conditioning. A system that learned to measure worth relationally doesn't suddenly know how to measure it internally. That skill was never practiced. So when you try to say, I'm proud of myself, it can feel ungrounded, like saying a sentence without context. There's nothing for the body to hook into yet. Another layer often sits underneath this too. If praise or approval once felt inconsistent, present sometimes, absent other times, the system may have learned to keep the bar moving. Don't settle yet. Don't relax yet. Do more first. Because relaxing before confirmation once felt risky. So pride gets delayed, not denied. Always scheduled for later. Later becomes a place you're always approaching, but never quite arriving. From the outside, this can look like ambition or discipline. From the inside, it often feels like restlessness. Not striving for more exactly, but waiting to finally exhale. There's also often an unspoken rule learned early on. Self-acknowledgement only counts if it's earned publicly. Private effort doesn't register the same way. Quiet survival doesn't get labeled as success. Learning curves don't feel worthy yet. Staying with something hard doesn't translate into pride. So when life becomes less dramatic, less visibly measurable, the internal sense of worth can flatten. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is especially right either. Just muted. Understanding this gently matters, because without it, the mind tends to turn inward. Why can't I feel proud like other people seem to? Why does encouragement slide off me? Why does this feel empty even when I'm trying? Those questions can quietly turn into self-blame. But this pattern didn't come from a flaw. It came from adaptation. Your system learned what it needed to learn to stay connected, safe, and oriented. It learned to listen outward first. That doesn't disappear just because you want it to. It softens through awareness, not force. And noticing this, seeing the pattern instead of judging it, already changes the tone of the conversation inside. Instead of "what's wrong with me?" the question becomes, "Oh, this is how I learned to survive." That shift matters, because when pride hasn't been practiced internally, it doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to permission. And permission starts with understanding, not fixing the pattern, not trying to override it, just recognizing it for what it is, a learned way of orienting toward worth. We don't need to undo it yet. We can just relate to it differently. When this pattern is seen clearly, there can be a quiet urge to do something about it, to correct it, to replace it, to finally feel the pride that's been missing. That urge is understandable, but it's often the same movement that's been happening all along, reaching for something to make the inner state change. Here, we're not doing that. This part isn't about producing pride. It's about changing how you relate to the space where pride hasn't been. Instead of asking, "How do I make this go away?" there's a gentler question available. What happens if I stay? Staying doesn't mean starring intensely or analyzing. It means letting the experience be present without assigning it a task. When the absence of pride shows up, you might notice it as a sensation before it's a thought. A flatness in the chest, a slight drop in energy, a feeling of being unheld. Usually, the system wants to move away from that quickly, to distract, to evaluate, to compare. Awareness does something different. It doesn't fix the feeling. It gives it company. That alone can soften the edges. You're no longer standing across from the experience, trying to figure it out. You're standing beside it. This changes the internal posture. Instead of "I need to feel different," the body hears, "I'm allowed to be here like this." That permission matters more than it sounds, because many of these patterns were formed in environments where inner states had to be justified. Feelings needed reasons. Worth needed proof. Here, none of that is required. You're not trying to convince yourself you're proud. You're noticing what happens when pride doesn't arrive, and not abandoning yourself in that moment. That's a different kind of reliability. You might notice thoughts come in during this staying. "I should be further along. Others are doing better. This is pointless." Those thoughts don't need to be argued with. They're just the mind doing what it learned to do, scanning for orientation. Awareness doesn't wrestle them. It notices them the way you might notice weather passing through. Present, temporary, not a command. Over time, something subtle can shift here. When the system senses that you're not leaving, just because pride isn't present, it begins to relax its vigilance. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough. This is important. You're not trying to build confidence here. You're building tolerance for quiet, for the moments where nothing is being confirmed, and nothing is being withdrawn either. That middle space, staying in that space, even briefly, teaches the nervous system something new. I don't disappear when no one is applauding. I'm still here when there's no signal. This moment doesn't require performance. That learning happens beneath words. It happens through presence. And presence doesn't look impressive from the outside. It looks like pausing, like not rushing to the next thing, like letting effort exist without commentary. In that way, awareness becomes a kind of trust. Not trust that everything will work out. Not trust that confidence will suddenly arrive. Trust that you can stay with yourself without needing to turn yourself into a project. That trust creates space. And in space, new responses can form naturally. Not because you forced them, but because the system isn't being pushed anymore. For now, that's enough. Just noticing, just staying, just not leaving the moment because it feels incomplete. Nothing to fix, nothing to prove, only a different way of being with what's already here. We can slow this moment down a little, not to do anything with it, just to give it more room. Sometimes the most supportive thing here is simply letting the body register that you're still moving, even if nothing dramatic is happening. You may not feel like a success. You may not feel settled or certain, but there is movement, learning, adjusting, continuing. That matters, even if it doesn't feel impressive. If it feels natural, you might notice the breath for a moment. Not to calm yourself, just to notice that it's there, arriving on its own. An inhale, an exhale, nothing to hold on to. And in that slowing, a few quiet phrases might drift through, not as affirmations to repeat, but as thoughts you're allowed to touch. Something like, I don't need permission to feel proud. Not as a statement you have to believe, just as a sentence that can exist nearby. Or, I've survived more than I give myself credit for. Not as a summary of your life, just as an acknowledgement that things have been carried. You might also notice the truth of this one, even if it feels understated. I may not be where I want to be yet, but I'm not who I used to be. That difference doesn't always announce itself. Often it shows up quietly in how you respond, in what you're willing to stay with, in the fact that you're still here, still choosing this path, still learning how to walk it. If attention wants something to rest on, it can rest on that sense of continuing, not reaching, not proving, just the simple fact of showing up again. And maybe for a moment, you let yourself notice the effort underneath the day, the effort no one else sees, the effort that doesn't get measured. You don't have to name it perfectly. It's enough to sense it. From there, a sentence might arrive on its own, slowly without pressure. I trust myself to learn. I trust myself to grow. I trust myself to show up, even imperfectly. You don't need to repeat them. You don't need to feel certain. They can just pass through, like something being tried on gently. And if it feels right, only if it feels right, you might let this land quietly. I'm proud of myself for continuing. Not because everything is okay. Not because you've arrived, but because you're still on the path you chose. Still growing into it. Still here. You can stay with that for a breath or two. Or let it go. Nothing is required to come next. There's something steady about continuing. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look confident from the outside. Often it just looks like another ordinary day, where you show up again. And yet that steadiness carries more truth than moments of certainty ever did. Pride in this sense isn't a feeling you generate. It's something that settles in when the system no longer feels pressured to perform. It comes from being with yourself, without needing to add or subtract anything. You may notice that confidence feels different here. Less like belief, more like familiarity. Not "I know I'll be fine," but "I recognize myself." That recognition builds quietly, through moments like this, where nothing is being solved and nothing is being avoided. Just presence. Over time, the nervous system begins to understand that safety doesn't only come from approval. It can also come from consistency, from knowing you won't disappear when things are unclear, unfinished, or uncelebrated. That kind of safety isn't dramatic. It's subtle. It feels like having somewhere to stand. Even when the ground is uneven, you might still want more for your life. You might still be growing towards something undefined. None of that is a problem here. Wanting more doesn't cancel out what's already been lived. Movement forward doesn't erase what's been endured. Both can exist at the same time. And maybe that's what pride becomes in the end. Not a judgment of how far you've come, but a quiet respect for the fact that you're still here, still learning how to live inside your own experience. No permission needed, no audience required, just a soft acknowledgement that continuing has its own weight. You don't have to hold onto this reflection. You don't have to remember it later. It's enough that it passed through. That for a few moments, you weren't measuring yourself, only accompanying yourself. And that on its own means something.